Happy Friday and happy Fridays with Fidelman. I'm Cheryl Fidelman, the Conscious Codependence Coach. And today's topic on Fridays with Fidelman is the codependence and disassociation. And while I'm not a mental health professional, so I want to be clear that I'm not talking about anything that can be categorized as a dissociative disorder. I'm simply talking about those of us who identify as codependent and have the habit or behavior, because we don't all have the same cluster of habits or behaviors, so many different ones for that codependents experience. But for those of us, myself included, who experience a level of disassociation from self in codependent moments, this one's for you. I've noticed here and there over the years that I've had clients here and there ask me or wonder, Cheryl, maybe I'm on the spectrum somehow, or maybe I'm an HSP, a highly sensitive person, or maybe I have some dissociative disorder that is just kind of the way it is, and it's unfixable, and it's unchangeable, and I should be on some sort of medication. Now, again, I'm not a mental health professional. I always want to make that very, very clear. I'm not a mental health professional, so I cannot and won't, it's important for me to stay in my lane. I won't address anything that I suspect may be diagnosable, or even curiosities or wonderments about things that are diagnosable. But I can address anything that I hear, sense, can tell is in the area of codependence, because I am a professional codependent or a codependent professional. So I'm not a mental health professional, I'm a professional codependent. I'm trying to get that joke to work. In any case, when it comes to having the experience of disassociating from self, what happens for a lot of us codependents is we get flooded. In a given moment, with lots of stimulus, in a conversation that we don't quite understand what's happening, or we may start to feel unsafe, and instead of feeling unsafe and then in our sovereignty, so as my clients move through their conscious codependence recovery in my work, we're leaning into sovereignty, which means that we may have a thought, a sensation, or emotion, and then we lean into connection. But what happens earlier on for people in their codependence recovery, and this is how I used to be, myself included, is we get a thought, a feeling, or an emotion or sensation that tells us we're not safe. We get flooded and we lean out of connection. And so we lean out of connection with the person, and or we lean out of connection with ourself. I mean, that's the first point of connection or disconnection, is with self. And then because we're so flooded with thoughts, sensations, and or emotions, it may occur or feel like we're disassociating. We're disconnecting, we're going away. And we may, yes, actually be going away from physically or just energetically going away from the person that we're with and going away from ourself. But the way that I frame it in my work is that we're not necessarily disassociating with self, we're just switching our focus. We're switching our focus to this flood, the flood of sensation and emotion, also the flood of messages, right? For some of us, the messages: don't speak, don't talk, just assume you know what's happening, assume that that you're not safe, assume that you can't trust, assume that you can't speak up. And so we get flooded by our loudest voice of our youngest unhealed trauma, our inner punisher, or our traumatic identity. I have many videos on those things as well. For those of you who are coming new to my work, those are some of the distinctions of my work. And so we get flooded by negative inner voice, which is our inner punisher. We get taken over by a younger version of ourself. This is the arrested development of our traumatic identity, the arrested development of our codependent moments. And we had a great free and monthly conscious codependence class last week, which was, the topic was arrested development. So if you didn't catch that class, feel free to go into the Facebook group. All of the recordings of the free and monthly classes are in the Facebook group. So what happens is we get flooded, and it's like all disconnection. How do I say this? We get flooded, and reality starts to become like a kaleidoscope. And because we're so flooded, and we haven't yet learned or trained our nervous system how to swim out of this flood, or how to actually include the flood in our experience. Or in my work, the somatic experiencing element of my work is that we actually learn how to expand the threshold for the thoughts, the sensations, and emotions. This is my conscious codependence TSC practice. Expand our experience to hold and include and notice the entire flood, and then get reconnected with self and potentially reconnected with other. Sometimes this happens in a moment with someone or with a group of people, and sometimes we may have an anticipation of a flood. So one may not go towards dating, or go towards love, or go towards trying to hold their partner's hand or have intimacy, or go towards having a certain conversation with somebody because we're anticipating a flood. And it's common for us codependents to project that flood. And what I mean by that is it's the other person's fault, or the other person is going to make me feel XYZ, or the other person's going to get mad at me, or the other person's going to not accept me. But from the point of view of my work, what we're anticipating is actually the flood that we're going to feel when something we think happens is going to happen. And also, sometimes there's actually an anticipation of a flood that may happen when we actually possibly may get what we want. I've worked with a lot of people who, and myself included, where it's actually sometimes easier to stay in a mediocre frequency of life and not try too hard, just kind of get by. Because too much success may feel like too much. It may actually flood us and we might not be able to handle it. Or too much love. Or too much, fill in the blank. Or too much of a good thing may flood us with suspicion. This is another reason why for some codependents, myself included, isolation seems like a really great choice. Because sometimes there's just too much stimulus out there in the world at large, or out there just, having conversations with people, or interacting with certain members of our family may give us what I call a flood. One or more members of our family, or a boss, right? I'm not going to have that conversation because it's just going to be too overwhelming. And I also want to throw into this conversation also what I call the codependent hangover. So this is when we get flooded after the interaction, or you get flooded during the interaction, but after the interaction, you're still carrying it with you. And you're still going over it in your head over and over and over. So the flooding happens in the hangover state as well. And this is another way that we disassociate. We're not present in the moment because we're still analyzing and going over what happened 5 minutes ago or what happened last week. So we're oftentimes not present in the moment with who we're with because we're thinking about what just happened. We're disassociated from the moment because we're replaying, we're not yet resolved, we're still trying to figure out, we're wondering if that person trusts us, if we trust them, if we said the right thing, and maybe we should have said something else. So we're reframing, regurgitating what just happened, which is what I call a codependent hangover, and that disassociates us from whatever current moment that we're in. This is a huge thing for a lot of us codependents, so I'm probably going to do a whole video on this as well, which is not being able to experience resolve for codependence. Another reason that, or another thing that influences disassociation. We're just not resolved. We're not resolved from our past. We're not resolved from the past, could be just 5 minutes ago or last week. We're carrying around all of this stuff, which influences our want to be wanted. My 3 tenets of conscious codependence: the want to be wanted, the need to be needed, the need to prove oneself, because we are inundated with reasons to prove. We're inundated with reasons why we shouldn't speak. We're inundated with reasons why we should be afraid of somebody. We're inundated with things that we want to know, that we're curious about, but we can't ask, so we just assume what they mean, and we just assume what other people mean. So we're inundated with all of this stuff, trying to survive different conversations and realities that are stuck in our head, because we're believing our inner punisher. We're perceiving threats where there is no threat, so we have a whole bunch of fear. And because when we have the fear, we tend to lean out of connection, as opposed to having the fear and leaning into connection with vulnerability and curiosity and wonderment. We're dominated by people, or we don't want to ask, because for a lot of us analyzers and achievers, which is my main demographic, we just want to show the parts of us that show that we're doing a good job, that we're successful, that we have it figured out, that we can get the job done, and we don't have questions because we know. So a lot of the flooding comes from not exposing that we don't know what's going on, or not exposing our curiosity, or not exposing our vulnerability. We don't want to expose anything that would have us not occur as the identity that we want to be seen as, or not occur as vulnerable, or not occur as having it all figured out. Anyway, the list goes on, because codependence comes in so many different forms. And also the flooding and the disassociation is sourced from so many different places within us. The reason why I want to really drive home this disassociating thing, because in my work with the Conscious Codependence TSC practice and our Conscious Codependence recovery, which is expedited codependence recovery, we can close the gap on this disassociation. We actually can hold all of these things, all of the thoughts, all of the sensations, all of the emotions, and be associated with self and with other. So we're holding the vastness of our imagination. We're holding the vastness of what we can feel, what our sensations and our emotions, and the vastness of our mind. And it's like you are able to be connected and present to yourself and present to other, all of you, all of your uniquenesses, all of your weirdnesses, all of your brilliance, all of the ways in which you're connected to reality, and all the ways that you're not connected to reality. Because ultimately, we're only hiding that from ourselves. We're only hiding it from ourselves. The main point of disassociation is the point of disassociation from the overwhelming flood of reaction that a lot of us codependents have. So I can go on about this forever. Disassociation was my dearest and closest friend for most of my life. And when I moved through that disassociation is when I started to feel. Because ultimately the disassociation was, I just wasn't feeling. And I didn't know what I was feeling, and I wasn't interpreting my feelings accurately. It was like I to myself was an illusion. I to myself was this kaleidoscope of an inner world. Hence the disassociation from self. So I can go on about this forever. Thank you so much for listening. A couple of quick announcements in the Conscious Codependence community. I'm almost done with my book proposal for the 3 Tenets of Conscious Codependence book. I'm going to be submitting it to literary agents and publishers. If any of you out there are a literary agent or a publisher who might be interested in my work, or you know of one, feel free to drop me a line. Also, between now and the end of the year, I don't have any new group programs starting. So what I have now is the Conscious Codependence One Day. So for those of you who want to take a deep dive on one day with me for your Conscious Codependence private one day, go ahead, drop me a line. And then at the beginning of the year, I'll be making more announcements about my new groups that will be starting at the top of the year. And I want to highlight that at the beginning of the year, I'm going to have a group just for guys or people who identify as men. All right. Thanks so much for listening to my thought series and rants. I'm trying to move away from this line of light here. Happy healing. Thanks again for bringing my mind and my heart and my work into your world. Life is now. Happy Friday. Hope you have a sweet weekend. Bye.